Hi everyone, welcome to another video. This time we're going to be looking at the history of Reading Football Club. In 1889, Reading were unable to continue playing at Elm Park as W.B. Monk, the local squire, no longer allowed football due to rowdyism or the rougher elements, as he otherwise put it. With club membership exceeding 300 by the time the club went professional in 1895, Reading required a proper ground. A meeting the following year determined that funding would be difficult. £20 was donated by J.C. Fiddler on the proviso that no liquors were to be sold on the site. The rest of the cost was financed through donations by wealthy supporters, as well as one large individual donation. A former gravel pit in West Reading was identified as a site, and the area was leased from Councillor Jesse. The first game at Elm Park was held on the 5th of September 1896 between Reading and the A. Roston Burke Six, named after Honorary Secretary of the Referees Association Arthur Roston Burke. The visitors were a scratch team from Holloway College and thus not registered with the Football Association. The match was abandoned due to torrential weather when Reading were leading 7-1. £44 was taken on the gate with an attendance of approximately 2,500. After the match, Reading were fined £5 and suspended for playing against an unregistered team. In 1908, the club's annual general meeting proposed moving to a newer ground near Reading railway station. A board meeting the following year decided that the move would not be possible, as there was no chance of a move to the ground near the GWR railway stations due to the actions of the Great Western Railway. The ground was redeveloped following the club's promotion to the second division in 1926. A new grandstand holding around 4,000 people was opened on the 13th of November 1926 and remained until the ground's demolition. The Town End Terrace was improved in 1931 as a result of supporters' club's £1 scheme, whilst the central section of the South Bank was roofed in 1936. A public address system was installed in 1946, and in the same year a £20,000 fund was set up to completely cover the South Bank. This was completed in two stages in 1949 and 1956. In 1949, club chairman William Lee commissioned a firm of architects to redesign the ground. The club built new turnstiles, access routes, dressing rooms, office space and bathing facilities. Plans to cover the town end and building a new double-decker stand over the South Bank never progressed due to the post-World War II regulations, restricting the club's ability to obtain building materials. The club installed floodlights, which were first used on the 6th of October 1954 against Racing Club de Paris in a friendly match, with the second half broadcast live on the BBC in front of a crowd of 13,000 people. The Tilehurst end was built in 1957. The railway sleepers had become rotten and weed infested and were replaced by 4-inch high concrete steps. The capacity of the ground was roughly 30,000 at this stage. The addition of new refreshment stands, the opening of the club shop and the installation of folding seats to replace the bench seating in Norfolk Road Grandstand were among the limited improvements to the ground until its closure. The appointment of manager Jack Mansell in 1969 saw improved floodlights added. Talk of a two-tiered South Stand re-emerged as crowds briefly topped 15,000, but relegation to Division 4, where the club remained for 5 years, prevented this from happening. The increase of football hooliganism in the 1970s led the club to erecting fencing at their end of the South Bank, completely separating each of the 4 stands for the first time. Previously, supporters had been able to walk from one end of the ground to the other via the South Bank. It wasn't until the 1980s when the club officially designated the Town End to away supporters. In the early 1980s, Asian club chairman Frank Waller was negotiating a merger with Oxford United owner Robert Maxwell, who reduced any desire from the club's board to improve facilities at Elm Park. The initial proposal was for a new stadium to be built in Didcot. The merger would almost certainly have led to the closure of Elm Park, with the ground being sold for redevelopment. The team's merger and closure of the stadium was subsequently averted, and the following season saw Reading's promotion back to Division 3 under the guidance of Ian Branfoot. Following the collapse of the merger, new chairman Roger Smee had ambitions to move the club to a new ground. The Reading Chronicle reported his desire for a 10,000 all-seater stadium in the Smallmead area, which would be linked to commercial use and incorporate a leisure complex. At the time, no Football League club had moved grounds for nearly 30 years, and it wouldn't be until Scunthorpe's relocation to Glanford Park in 1988 that a new ground was built. In 1984, the proposal for the club's move to the Smallmead area of Reading was noted in the local government's Kennet Valley plan. For 6 years, between 1979 and 1985, there was no league match that attracted a gate higher than 10,000 at Elm Park, in a downward trend echoed by the rest of English football. The Popplewell report into the Bradford City Stadium fire had implications for Elm Park, especially the 1926 built wooden grandstand. Smoking was banned in seating areas, the gangways were widened and seats were deemed unsuitable due to being too far away from fire exits. As these seats were at the back of the stand, they had to be replaced with 12 executive boxes. In total, around 1,000 seats were lost, and Elm's capacity was initially reduced to 8,000 ahead of the 1985-86 season. That season saw the club promoted back to the second division for the first time since 1931. Minor changes to the ground were required. A new fire exit headed to egress onto Norfolk Road, otherwise known as exit onto Norfolk Road. The Tilehurst Road turnstiles were demolished and replaced with a new block towards the south bank, and the Royal Rendezvous Bar was constructed behind the south bank. Reading introduced an identity card scheme ahead of the government's proposed legislation on the topic, which would have required all supporters to be registered with a Football League club. It was required for entry to South Bank, and fences were introduced at the front of the stands to prevent home and away supporters from entering the field of play. The club returned to the third tier for the 1988-89 season. The Taylor report regarding the 1989 Hillsborough disaster, recommending all-seater stadium become compulsory in the top two divisions of English football, something which would be introduced for the 1994-95 season. The report also led to a provision being dropped in the Football Spectators Act in 1989 that would have required supporters to have an identity card, and fences were no longer insisted on by football authorities. Initially, clubs in the lower two divisions of the Football League would have required to have all-seater stadia by 1999, but this was later scrapped. In 1992, the club believed that they had 7 years before they had to be playing in an all-seater stadium, and the Footballing Licensing Authority had concerns about the safety of the town end. While some safety work was carried out at that end of the ground, the club put its efforts into building a new stadium. Following Reading's promotion back to the second tier in 1994, they became required to have an all-seated ground within 3 seasons. Converting Elm Park to an all-seater stadium would have been impractical, with a fully seated Elm Park having an estimated capacity of around 9,000. The club would have constraints relating to parking and providing large enough offices for the club's expanding backroom staff. Reading lost the 1995 First Division playoff final, with the victors being promoted to the Premiership. It was unclear whether Elm Park would have been allowed to host Premiership matches, with locations in London being mooted. The club's progression during this period saw the club's plan for a new ground increase from 15,000 seats in 1992 to 25,000 seats once the plans were publicly revealed in August 1995, around 3 times the capacity of a fully seated Elm Park. The plans for Elm Park were to flatten the ground and build 128 dwellings on the site and retaining the Royals Rendezvous Bar. A location in Smallmead to the south of the town was identified as the site for a new stadium. The former council landfill site was bought for £1, with further conditions that the development of the stadium would include part funding of the A33 Relief Road. Expansion of the club's home ground would also allow an alternative commercial venture and shared use with other teams such as rugby union clubs Richmond and London Irish. The last competitive match at Elm Park took place on the 3rd of May 1998 against Norwich City, with Reading losing 1-0, having already been relegated to Division 2, to a 57-minute goal by a young Craig Bellamy. The ground was maintained over the summer to be used in the event that the Madejski Stadium wasn't finished in time for the new season. Reading played Sheffield Wednesday in a pre-season friendly at the ground prior to the start of the following season, winning 3-0 in front of a crowd of 7,500. 2 testimonials for Fred Neat, please forgive me if I pronounced that wrong, and Michael Gilks, and an over-35s tournament featuring a supporters club team followed before the contents of the ground were auctioned off. Reading began the 1998-99 season at the Madejski Stadium, named after John Madejski, who had taken over the club in 1991 and delivered the new stadium, and the demolition of Elm Park began in October 1998. And there ends the video on Reading FC. I would just like to say at the end of this video that I do wish them all the best in being able to survive and not being expelled from the Football League. I hope that the ownership issues are sorted, as it will be extremely sad to see a football club disappear. Thank you very much for listening to my video. If you do like the channel, please like, share and subscribe. And until the next video, take care of yourselves and bye for now.